All right, welcome to another video in our series from the Tech Data Cyber Range, where we highlight one of our training partners. Today, we'll be highlighting again Rangeforce. Rangeforce was founded by three entrepreneurs who worked together as contractors for the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, also known as CCD COE. They have brought a platform that helps teams upskill and build true cyber resiliency. This is through courses and modules, which highlight many different topics related to IT security. Today, we'll be going through Yara Rule Generation. The Yara Rule Generation course helps familiarize ourselves with generating rules for malware samples using a utility called Yara Gen. Yara, for those who don't know, is a tool for malware research and detection. It was created by an individual over at Virus Total, and it is categorized as the Swiss Army knife for malware researchers. John, are you out there?
Hello.
Now, John, I know you've worked in some capacity with Yara before at some of your prior places of employment. What's your initial thoughts about it?
It's definitely a very handy tool. It helps you quickly and easily compare malware samples or things that you might think are malware against a rule set, kind of like what we see here. It does pattern recognition, passes through that file looking for those strings, and then you set your condition to say, if you find these things, then yes, it is indeed malicious. So it's a kind of a quick and easy way for security analysts to get a better grasp of the files that they're looking at. And I think based on what I read, what we're going to be doing today is using a tool to help us create those Yara rules. And, based on things I've seen and things I read, this looks like a really neat tool. And funny little side note too, when I was doing some background research for this module, I was wondering what Yara stood for, thinking it would be some fancy, cool cyber lingo, but it actually just stands for yet another recursive, ridiculous acronym. So I thought that was kind of amusing.
Yeah, it is amusing. I think ultimately what makes Yara really great to work with is how it's multi-platform. You can run it on Windows, Linux, Mac OS X. It can be used through its command line interface or on your own in Python scripts because Yara has a Python extension. And one of the other things I had found as well is that Yara by default comes with modules to process portable executables, executable and linkable format for ELF based files for analysis, and which is another thing that's interesting, and we at the Cyber Range are working on setting up, is a malware analysis lab. But Yara can integrate with the Cuckoo sandbox. So maybe that's something we'll review in a different one of these videos, is what is Cuckoo. But today, let's go ahead and just dive right in. So we've done a video in the past that shows you how to use and work through the Rangeforce platform in launching modules and continuing them. We've also showed you how Rangeforce maps their courses, which the course as a whole is Yara, but the individual modules here make up an introduction, rule management, rule generation, etc. Today, we'll specifically be going over rule generation, and each of these maps to a nice skill set. And those skill sets map to positions or jobs within cybersecurity. So if you're someone who works at your current employer and you're responsible for malware research, maybe this is an area you want to get into. And if it's an area, maybe you're not currently employed, but you want to upskill yourself and you're in IT, Rangeforce is a great platform to do that. So we've gone ahead here and already have launched the module. We've talked about the virtual teaching assistant in the past, which is basically your guide to working through these modules. Quickly, we'll show the material page. This material page provides you with information that is important for what you'll be going through in the lab. So it talks about Yara Gen, who it was created by, how to get it up and running on the system. One of the things that is important to note is that Yara has been ported over from Python 2.7 to Python 3. So every time that you execute Yara Gen, if you do a get pull or you're going through it in this system provided by Rangeforce, make sure that you use Python 3 as you do that. So I think that is enough said for a general overview perspective, and we can just go ahead and dive right into it. So let's see what our virtual teaching assistant wants for us to do. All right, so Yara Gen is already installed on this system. Before we get started, it wants us to go ahead and update using the -- update option. This automatically updates and downloads the databases and could take several minutes. So after it's been updated, it'll say, hey, I've been updated. So let's go ahead here and open our terminal. Get into our working directory. See there, we have Yara Gen. Sorry, I keep saying Yara. But it's Yara Gen. And then let's go ahead, validate the Python script is there. And because Yara Gen is going to be running updates, I'm going to go ahead and run it as sudo just in the event it needs to write anything to my file system. It has the permissions to do so. So let's go ahead and kick that off. And as that's running, guess we'll talk a bit in the background. Yeah. So we've done, we did the basic Yara introduction module already, where we had to go through a suspicious file that was sent via email. This module helped us familiarize ourselves with installing Yara and using Yara to identify how a file is malicious. A great introduction before you begin and get started with some of these other Yara modules themselves. Now, I've seen, John, I don't know about you, but there with GitHub and with everything that a lot of different security researchers are doing within the community, there are repositories from different security vendors and other providers of IT security products that actually write and put into repos Yara rules. Is that something you've seen as well?
It is, and as a matter of fact, kind of when you were showing the Rangeforce course modules, I think that was one of the other courses that they have mapped out, is showing you how to manage their Yara rule management, I believe. Yeah, public repositories of Yara. So yeah, the kind of the neat thing about Rangeforce is they not only show you how to use a tool, but really dive into how to make the most of it, which I think is missing in a lot of training platforms.
Right. And something we should mention too, which I didn't before, is there's actually a lot of people, maybe the who's who use and leverage Yara. So Trend Micro, Virus Totals Intelligence Platform, Symantec, Reversing Labs. You know, you got other people like Heroku on here, ESET, very prominent endpoint protection solution in Europe. like before we mentioned Cuckoo, Sandbox.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely making a lot of headway in the security industry. So, like you mentioned before, if you are an individual that's looking to either be a security analyst or
mhm.
specifically get into malware analysis, this is definitely something you want in your toolkit
Yeah.
of knowledge to have.
And the materials that are provided to you here from Rangeforce are very good at giving
Mhm.
you a stepping stone into familiarizing yourself with how to use not only Yara but YaraGen, but even furthermore, when you begin to work on your own with these tools,
Mhm.
knowing that you may have to sit down and read the manual.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
don't be scared of that.
these material pages so far that I've seen are good enough that I would use it as an actual reference for
Mhm.
using some of these tools.
Yeah, because it's right here, right? As I just scroll on through it, it's providing you with information about rule creation flags, and what the different flags do for you as you use YARGen, when you're working and you're trying to set the flag maximum number for strings, what you
Mhm.
include, how you then can decode the output of the YARGen rules, from the
Mhm.
.yar file that's created. And here, right here, is a link to where the YARGen documentation can be found on GitHub. So as we were talking back and forth there, right there, we went ahead and got our green check mark. So again, a great thing about this platform is that it lets you know, right? Hands on the keys, you can type things and you can work through the module as you would be working on your own host system. And the virtual teaching assistant tells you as you're progressing,
It
and gives you
knows.
a check mark for that. So on to the next objective. So first run, it's time to run YARGen for the first time and create some rules. Awesome. You'll use the same you will use some malicious samples from the Yara introduction module. So those are in our attachments folder. So if we go back, there's our attachments folder. We'll run YARGen on the directory with the samples. So here we're given an example of what we need to run. Path to malware directory means, so if we go into attachments and we print working directory, this is our path to the malware directory. So if I'm going to copy that and I'll go up into YARGen, again, run this as sudo so it can access what it needs to, and then paste in our directory.
Right.
YARGen should go ahead and load through those attachments and generate for us a YARGen rules .yar file. So I think it would be good to come back to the materials here and read through this decoding the output of YARGen rules.yar.
Mhm.
So each Yara rule generated via YARGen is composed of 3 sections: meta, strings, and conditions. So here's the meta.
Mhm.
It includes a description, author, reference, date, and hash. These are the strings, and here are the conditions. Now, John, you want to talk through these strings and what they mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I know further in the documentation, I know it dives a bit deeper, but yeah, you get the 3 types of strings marked by either $S, $X, or $Z. And it basically goes from most specific to most general. So when the rule generator runs and you see the $S, basically those are highly specific sets of strings that it's looking for in the rules. So as an analyst, right, if you create a Yara rule and it does have those highly specific things, it's kind of a give and take, right? When the more specific you get, it might be harder to trigger on certain things because you are looking for literal strings. But that said, if you do get something that fires, you can be extremely confident that what fired was actually a hit. So, and I think the way that Yargen defines these is in that database that we updated, it has a list of what it calls, I think, goodware strings. So it knows common string patterns that most benign files has, and it looks for strings that are not those things in the malicious files, and then creates the list based on that.
So if anyone that is out there that's watching this doesn't know what benign is, can you just quickly go over that?
Sure. So just at least in the context of cybersecurity, a benign file would basically be non-malicious. So, you know, a regular Windows executable that's prepackaged with Windows, like Microsoft Word, right, isn't malicious in any way by itself. So that would be how I would define it.
Cool. So as you were giving the overview of the different sections that are placed into the .yar file, I went ahead and completed here. So from the command line, we just opened up Pluma, which is the editor we have on this Ubuntu system, to review the yargen rules .yar file. And so with this first, we've gotten our check marks and we know we're progressing in the right way. So as we move on into our next objective, it's wanting us to change information in the meta part with a description, the author, and the reference. So we're going to have to rerun yargen and use the different flags, PAR, to do that. But what I want to do real quickly is just show you here what the .yar file looks like. Here is the meta tag that we've talked about before in the strings, which are included in all the .yar files, as well as the condition. John, when we look through this file, the 8 of them attribute or condition that's applied here, this 8 is for the strings, correct?
Correct. So yeah, for that rule to fire, it has to satisfy the condition, which actually has 3 parts. That uint16, kind of and the OX5A4D. Based on the documentation I've read, it's looking for that specific set of hex characters in the file header itself. So that has to match. And the file size has to be less than 300 kilobytes. And 8 of those 20 strings has to be inside of the file. So if all of those conditions are met, then the Yara rule would trigger as it stands.
Awesome. So this is the full condition, but each part of this condition is made up based upon the strings information, and not only that, but also file size attributes.
Exactly, and the conditions, it's basic Boolean logic with ands and ors, right? So if you were creating it on your own, you know, and you only wanted to have 2 out of the 3 conditions, you know, you can have combinations of ands and ors. But in this case, it looks like every condition is all ands.
So something I'm seeing here as I scroll down through is there seems to be some strings that might match common attributes of a file, specifically when it relates to this yargen rule that was created on our PDF. Some of these ns.adobe, these look like standard headers. So maybe talk through refining rules, and I'm sure this is more of what we'll do later in the lesson, but talk briefly about the iterative process excuse me there, for going through and refining what you're working on.
Sure. So with security, whether we're dealing with this, with Yara rules or any other security tool, there's always an iterative process where you want to kind of rinse and repeat. So, you know, the last module was titled First Run. So this is kind of like the baseline, you would say, for your Yara rule generation. And as an analyst, right, you know, trust but verify, right? Obviously, this tool does great things and it saves a ton of time, but like anything that's automated, there's a decent chance that it will make mistakes. So this is where the human element in security is very important. So if I, as an analyst, was looking at this at first glance, just like you pointed out, I would see these description strings with all the Adobe links, and you know, from previous experience with PDFs, I'm 99.9% sure that those are standard string headers in an Adobe PDF file. So, and then if we look too, it's $S5 through $S12, which I believe totals up to 8 conditions. And in our condition rule, right, we only need to match 8 of the 20. So at first glance, I would hypothesize that this rule would tend to flag on just about any Adobe Acrobat PDF that was under 2,000 kilobytes. But I guess as we move on through the modules, I'm sure we'll be able to refine that.
Well, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and close out a Pluma here because I don't believe we need to review this anymore. But we need to now go on to editing some of the description, author, and reference information. So to rerun, we'll just scroll back up through our command line here. And sudo python3 yargen.py-m, our directory that has the samples in it. And we want to add the prefix yargen to the description. So I believe that can be done with -p. We'll just say yargen. We want to set the author name to be range force. That's an A. And then we want to set our reference URL to the range force materials page. Make sure I don't fat finger anything here.
And yep, there you go.
Yep.
As I say, with these, you definitely want to make sure you get all the slashes correct, because I'm not 100% sure, but I think the engine in range force is going to actually parse through the Yara file and look specifically for those strings. So you want to make sure that you match it exactly.
Right. And it also helps when, even if you weren't doing this in the range force learning platform and you were creating your own yargens for yourself at work, you would want to ensure that if you're going to contribute this anywhere, that the information in the meta part is accurate to where you're working. So not only do you get good credit, you can get credit for that, but people know who is contributing. So
exactly.
Sorry, it took me a while there to formulate my thoughts.
That's okay. So while this is running too, kind of something that caught my eye with the last iteration, and I'm sure it'll pop out this time too, was it said that it generated 3 simple rules and 0 super rules. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing about this with that was mentioned in the materials is you know, simple versus super. So when we were looking in our text editor earlier, yeah, there it says it again, generated 3 simple rules, 0 super rules. So it broke out condition sets for each of the 3 files that were in our attachments folder. But what's neat about about this tool is that if it finds enough commonalities between the 3 pieces of malware, it will instead write a super rule that you could then check all of your malicious samples just against one rule set. So this can be helpful if you're trying to analyze like a malware family that had commonalities.
Yeah, especially now where malware as a service, right? Kind of a little title I like to use, where you have one author who creates a framework or a kit and then sells it to people online through various forums and marketplaces. And then there are just attributes they have to change about it. It's all in the same malware family, right? Being that the parent of it is the same, but then the children are what's different. You could probably use that for a lot of the different WannaCry variants that are out there in the wild, still going on, right?
Yep, absolutely. So cool.
Well, looks like I did type it and accurately and didn't fat finger anything, so we got our third check mark there. And let's go ahead and go back to our instructions and move on to the next objective. So this goes over string scoring. So John, you did briefly talk about a moment ago the string scoring and how the strings are different, are identified, whether that's specific strings, rare strings, or even definitions of an ordinary string. So let's see what they want for us to do. Each of the strings has its own score. You can see how the strings were scored by the yargen with the -- score option. So add the scoring option to the yargen command. Scoring of the strings will appear as comments to the strings after you run yargen. So we can just go back in our command history. And if you're familiar with working in the Linux terminal, that's just an up arrow. And then we could just add -- score, right? And that should give us the scoring option we need at the end of our .yara file.
Yep. So yeah, this just goes one step further than the 3 categories and says not only will I give you those categories, but then I will rank them from highest confidence malicious to lowest based on the engine that it has. So I am curious to see how it ranks everything.
So, and then looking at the question posed to us, we'll have to open up our .yara file, and we'll have to figure out what is the highest score. So, went ahead and completed there. I could just scroll back up to where we've launched Pluma, and we'll go ahead and launch it in the background so that my terminal becomes free for me. But once we've done that, here is where the comments are added with the scores. That 30 seems to be...
Yep, there's 30 there too.
Yeah.
And
here's 30 here, 26. Looks like 30's the largest.
I believe that is right.
Interesting that it's on that DLL there for Windows System 32. Yeah, and 30 up here for the DLL as well. All right, let's go ahead and put in 30. Oh, it's not right. Let's see here.
You gotta do the decimals. Yeah. Super
there
accuracy.
We go. Be very accurate. All right, so we know 30 is the highest score. That's a pretty cool option there. That lets you know.
Yeah, just how to prioritize.
Scoring. Yeah.
Yep. Indeed. So even further optimization. So
getting, pings here. All right. So let's see. Optimize rules. So you can optimize your rules by taking out some of the low scoring strings. It is a good practice to first create your rules with -- score option and perform a second run with a minimum score set for your sample. You can strictly define the number of strings per rule with the RC option to make your rules more compact. So this just goes back to running this through an iterative process to narrow in on what you really want as part of your rule set, correct?
Yeah, sounds exactly right. Yeah, each time we're running it, we're getting it in a more usable place. So, and it looks like if we run these, it's going to shrink it down instead of having up to 20 potential string sets. That we're just going to limit it to 5 per rule, based on the highest score. So that should make them less prone to false positives.
So the minimum score is 15 and the number of strings is 5. So RC is for max, is the max strings flag, correct? And that's to specify the maximum number of strings to include in each rule. And then the -Z option is the minimum score. Yep. So we should just be able to do it like this, right?
So you still want to do the -- score.
Yep. -- score with the maximum number of strings to 5 and the minimum score to 15, correct?
Yep. Looks right. Given that this tool has to check quite a large amount of databases and it's doing it on 3 different files, it's relatively quick. I think each time it goes through, it's under a minute.
And then it's done.
Awesome. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and open up Puma again. And now we see that a lot of the verbose information we had before has been scaled back.
It also changed the condition, and because before it said it, at least 8, and now it's all of them. So it basically has to match 5 out of 5. Strings. And we can see too, especially on the PDF file, that it cut away the majority of those Adobe. Looks like there's only 1 in there.
Right here.
So, and then looks like S3 and S4 are highly specific hex strings. So that to me would appear to kind of be a more solid version. And also, it looks like S1, it's looking for Acrobat files with embedded JavaScript, which not necessarily malicious, but is a decent indicator.
Right. All of when the condition is met that all of these match, then you can conclude that it's likely malicious.
Exactly.
Well, cool. I definitely learned something from that. I've not used YaraGen in the past. I've familiarized myself a little bit with Yara, but that was definitely an excellent experience. So thank you, those that have watched this video, and for chilling out with us for a little bit here as we went through YaraGen on the Range Force cybersecurity skills training platform. Again, Range Force is one of our training partners here at the Tech Data Cyber Range. And yeah, that was great. So
good stuff.
We'll see you guys in another video. Have a great day.